Another day, another PSVR2 review, and today's takes you through an abandoned amusement park as you're hired to attempt to expose its secrets and explore it, but not all is as it seems, as both the animatronics who have come to life and the amusement park's darkest secrets are out to get you on your journey. While this might sound incredibly scary as a premise, unfortunately the end result is nowhere near as terrifying as I thought it would be, and instead leans weirdly into comedy with some strange gameplay elements, a lack of accessibility features, but also an underlying feeling that the layout of this park and the love poured into it as you explore it is genuinely quite well put together. So strap yourselves in, it's going to be a bit of a mixed one as we take on HappyFunland on PSVR2. Let's get into it. First of all, I've got to get the obvious out of the way. This frame rate that you're seeing right now varies throughout the video. It goes from slightly passable to absolutely diabolically terrible. I do understand that. In the headset, it runs perfectly at what I feel like is 90 FPS or 120. It's very smooth, but the social screen and gameplay you see runs horrendously, just like Wizards of the Dark Times and Vampire the Masquerade. These are the three games that I found over my course of reviewing PSVR2 games that run great in the headset, but don't look great on the social screen, so that's why that is. HappyFunland is a horror game at heart. It wants to be a dark comedy horror game that both spooks you and makes you laugh throughout, and unfortunately not all of these scares or jokes hit the mark, for me at least. And to tackle those two issues, we've got to talk about the story first instead of visuals like we mostly always do. We'll jump into that second, but I've got to set the stage here, and that is you are hired by an average Florida man to take you into an abandoned amusement park, essentially just to explore it and see what's left there. At least that's what you think. Some twists and turns are waiting for you throughout the story. I found these fairly predictable, and nothing really story-wise surprised me, but the story is there and it's serviceable and it's easy to follow, and it took me about 2.5 hours to progress through the entire game. If you're really dedicated though, you can go around and find up to 80 collectibles, I believe there are. So if you're really looking for those, it'll probably take you a bit longer, but I saw most of what the game had to offer in terms of areas and collectibles. But for the most part, this is incredibly linear. You're going throughout the park from different set piece to set piece in different theme locations around the park, and this all makes sense in the confines of the story that it's trying to tell. It does take itself a lot less seriously than I thought though, because I assumed this was going to be a FNAF style, very serious, very grounded tale, but it isn't really. And I think because of that, it loses a bit of what could have made it scary. The scariest parts of HappyFunland are at the start of the game where you don't know what you're getting yourself into, and you do have a few genuinely good It-inspired scares that do catch you off guard.
Oh, fucking hell.
But once you see what you're up against in terms of enemies and things hunting you, it loses its edge quite fast, and I think the game does lean into not taking itself so seriously in the end. Once it's shown you its full hand and realizes that you're no longer scared as a player, that's when it starts to ramp things up and become more of an action comedy. But we'll get into that in a bit. But overall, story-wise, it's coherent. I wasn't surprised by it, but I was entertained throughout. Let's talk about visuals though, because they are okay. They're a little bit worse than Vertigo 2's, I would say. Close-up objects look pretty damn good, but medium to far distance look quite muddy. And I think that's due to the render distance of a lot of things being in your visual spectrum at one time, and also the amount of breakable items on screen, because a lot of the stuff in this game can be smashed, hit about, and there's a lot of physics interactions going on, so perhaps some rendering quality has to be sacrificed to get it running as good as it does.
I'm going to figure out what that is.
Oh, everything's physics-based.
Just keep scoring the whole.
Speaking of running though, as I said earlier, it does run at 90 Hz. I think it feels quite smooth, so I'm assuming it does, but I don't have an exact number from the devs on this. But yeah, the game runs well. It doesn't look incredible, but in some areas the OLED panels of the PSVR2 make the lighting look quite nice, but the visuals do vary between each section. Sometimes I thought the game looked very, very nice with its prop placement, and scale in certain areas is really, really cool. And then in certain other areas, it feels like a segment has just kind of been slapped together using assets, and you can kind of see through the cracks a little bit, especially in some of the rides around the park, but we'll get onto those in a little bit. But overall, visually, it's alright. I think the actual models here are decent, but it's just the resolution that lets it down, and the putting together of the models in certain areas that you're traversing through that fall flat a little bit. I've got to talk about the menus as well, because this was slightly confusing to me. The menus only have maybe 2 options on them, and no option to turn off snap turning. It seems that snap turning is the only option here. You can adjust what increment it is, but there's no smooth turning option, which is really, really strange. The menus and the accessibility are very, very limited, and I'm not really a fan of that at all. Originally, I thought the snap turning was in place to kind of hide any reprojection, but Upon further inspection, it does seem like this game runs at a good 90 FPS at least, so I don't really understand why there's no smooth turning implemented here, but it isn't. At least not that I could find. Also, the crouching mechanic didn't seem to work for me either. You press down R3 to crouch, and it instead lifted me up higher than I was meant to be instead of crouching me down. Really confusing, not sure why that made that happen. And the movement is fairly standard, except for the fact that R2 and L2 move you backwards and forwards. The sticks also move you backwards and forwards like they do in every other game, but the triggers also do that as well, which I just didn't touch my entire playthrough, but for some reason that's bound to that in terms of moving backwards and forwards. Very odd, but yeah, that's how it is. Now let's tackle the meat of this game and the main segment of this video, which is the gameplay, because the gameplay itself is split between certain segments, including exploration, puzzles, combat, and rides. The exploration is pretty good. I enjoyed traversing around the park. Each of the segments of the park are designed really well. They feel cohesive, whether it's a pirate setting or a western setting or a space setting. They all have their themes, and it makes sense as you go through them. The exploration is quite fun, taking in little details. The puzzles are a mixed bag. Some of them are fairly simple. You just find an item like a key and take it to a door, which lets you through to the next area. And then some are in the form of mini golf courses, which you have to complete throughout the game. And you have a little pass sheet in your left hand that you can bring up throughout the game using L3 to check your scores on each hole. After playing a game like Walkabout Mini Golf, this feels not that polished and smooth, but for an indie game that's focusing on horror exploration and kind of survival and combat, the mini golf honestly wasn't too bad in terms of detection and hit strength. That being said, there are some frustrating holes which are a little bit annoying to do, and you have to do them to progress. However, they don't take up that much game time, but it was still a little annoying having them around the map and them halting up the gameplay and exploration, which was the main thing that I enjoyed. You'll also be doing a lot of combat throughout the game as well. Combat is a lot more prevalent than I thought it was going to be. Originally, I thought that you'd be hunted by the main rodent mascot that is in HappyFunland and is on all the promotional and posters. That's just not really the case though. You occasionally see glimpses of him and he'll squeal at you and run away and a little jump scare noise. None of these jump scares really got me, unfortunately, and I'm a really scared person in VR. But none of this really spooked me aside from the opening couple minutes of the game, because I didn't know what to expect. But you'll see the mascot appear in several locations. At one point he drugs you and that makes your visuals go really, really strange.
Okay, this is visually cool.
Which was pretty cool to see, to be honest. But in terms of an actual threat in the combat of the gameplay, you're not having this survival experience that I thought the game was going to be. Instead, you're kind of traversing around the park with either a golf club that you picked up from the mini golf courses or eventually a sword, and you're then fighting animatronics that kind of run at you, and their pathfinding is a little wonky at times. They can get stuck on a lot of things, and they're quite tanky. They can take a lot of hits, but they do satisfyingly have their heads and legs chopped off and arms chopped off if you hit them there, and you can send them absolutely flying. And at one point, it sends animatronic children at you if you should beat up, and I didn't know how to feel about that. That was a bit weird, reminded me of the youngling level from Blade and Sorcery, but yeah.
What the fuck? I've been assaulted by a child.
The combat itself is sometimes pretty satisfying and okay, but a little lackluster most of the time because some weird hit detection issues. There's no haptics for the hits either, really. And it is just the same enemy reskinned basically throughout the entire game that you're fighting until the final boss. In terms of combat as well, there are guns that you get in a certain level of the game, but this is tied to one ride only, and you have no enemies to shoot at with them through the entire ride. It's only targets that sort of set off little explosions and bangs for your own entertainment throughout the ride. There's no enemies to shoot, which is really, really strange. I don't know why the game gives you guns for a level that you don't even really need them for, and then takes them away from you immediately afterwards to relegate you back to swords. It's a bit odd, but you do have guns for about, I'd say, 5 to 10 minutes before they're taken away. Speaking of the ride that you have this gun on, you do go through most of the rides in the park, if not all of them, and these do offer some pretty cool sights for VR. Some of them take you quite high, and I genuinely felt a little bit sick in my stomach as it tilted me up and down, because the game does move you against your will. If you're a new VR player, there are certain points in this game where you will feel incredibly sick, probably, because you are being thrown around by big mechanical monsters, or being lifted up and down by certain rides, and it does make you feel a little sick if you don't have your VR legs, but they are genuinely really, really cool moments, especially in certain rides where they tilt you off axis and they lift you up and they spin you round.
Whoa. Okay, this is cool. This is really cool. Oh, that's sick.
It's stuff that I haven't experienced on PSVR2 aside from epic roller coasters, which are more traditional rides and not like certain ones that you see in the theme parks like are present here. And I thought moments like that were really, really cool. But overall, the rides do take control away from you, so if that's a no-no for you, maybe give this one a miss. But they were really enjoyable for a VR veteran who's played a lot, like me. So overall, the gameplay is a bit of a mixed bag. I wasn't really sold on the combat, but I did enjoy exploring this abandoned amusement park and taking in everything it had to offer in terms of visuals and also backstory on how it came to be. And there is quite a lot of effort put into each of these stages to make them feel believable, which I appreciate. The audio as well is perfectly okay. It feels very indie. Some audio does overlap as it's going along and feels a little bit off, but there are certain areas where the voice acting is pretty decent and the sound effects are good too. But overall, it's a pretty standard indie affair that doesn't really have too much to write home about. One final note I just want to include here, because it didn't really fit into many other sections, was that I did have a weird bug, or maybe it's a design choice, that when I died, it just put me exactly back where I was. Not at the last checkpoint, which there are save points around the game, so you don't lose all your progress when you exit, but it genuinely just put me exactly back into the point where I died, and just let me continue. I saw the game over screen, and then the game just continued, so I didn't have any detriment or anything to really punish me in terms of that. Really weird, never seen that before, but it did make playing through the levels a lot easier, which was very strange. So overall, HappyFunland, I was sold on some elements and areas of it and really not on others. And it feels weird me saying this, but I kind of wish it had more scares. It doesn't really deliver on the horror aspect that well, aside from the first opening couple minutes. Its big mascot isn't really seen that much in terms of an actual presence, but its last few segments are pretty bombastic and quite cool to see in VR despite some lackluster visuals at points, and an overall resolution which could use some work. I do believe though the game itself is made by one singular person, most of the coding, and I think the porting is just done by Perp Games or the publishing is just done by Perp Games. So as a one-person endeavor in terms of coding and making it, it is quite impressive and I'm excited to see what they go on to next. But overall, there are quite a few misses and a few hits here for HappyFunland on PSVR2. But if you're looking for an animatronic adventure through a theme park that will give you a couple spooks, but mostly just focus on combat and exploration, maybe this one's for you. Let me know if you're going to get it in the comments below, what you think of it from the gameplay, despite it being at about 2 FPS. Thank you to our patrons Luke Bentley, Phil Irving, Hazit Mirza, Ace Gamer, and anybody else who's considered supporting the channel on YouTube membership or Patreon. The link's in the description below, starting and ending at $3 a month. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.